This is Bearing Witness, a podcast committed to exposing hidden atrocities, confronting the darkest acts of violence, and demanding justice for victims whose voices were silenced. Today, we tell the harrowing story of Liga Skromane. In early 2018, Liga Skromane traveled thousands of miles from Latvia to Kerala, India, seeking a path to healing. Instead, she became the victim of a shocking crime, exposing failures in local law enforcement and raising difficult questions about safety, justice, and accountability. At 33, Liga Skromane carried 2 passports and a single wish: to feel whole again. Born in Latvia, raised amid the Baltic forests, she had spent her recent years in Ireland, alongside her partner, Andrew Jordan, cultivating a small circle of friends, a love of photography, and privately a battle with depression that traditional treatments never fully stilled. Those close to her recall an empathetic spirit, someone who sent handwritten notes instead of texts, and who believed almost stubbornly that beauty could be coaxed from any landscape if one waited for the right light. By early 2018, the darkness had thickened. Liga read articles about Ayurveda, India's ancient system of holistic medicine, and learned of a coastal retreat outside Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala, set to combine herbal therapies with meditation and ocean air. Her sister Ilze volunteered to accompany her. Andrew, hopeful yet anxious, promised to join later. On March 4th, they landed in Kochi, then traveled south by train. Liga writing in her journal, "I want my mind to quiet enough to hear the sea inside." Kerala greeted them with monsoon-washed greenery and the scent of cardamom. At the Pothincode Wellness Centre, Liga began herbal treatments and yoga at dawn. Staff noted her politeness. Fellow guests remember the Latvian sisters laughing over coconut water on the veranda. For 8 days, hope seemed tangible, as fragile and luminous as the oil lamps lining temple paths at dusk. That optimism, that trust in a place far from home, is where tonight's story must begin, because it reminds us that every victim first believed the world would offer care rather than cruelty.
Content warning: sexual violence, torture, and extreme cruelty. The next minutes contain descriptions of sexual violence and murder, conveyed as sparingly as truth allows.
Wednesday, March 14th, 2018. Liga told Ilse she felt restless and wanted a short walk. CCTV later showed her near the resort gate. Witnesses recall her asking for cigarettes. She did not return for lunch. By sunset, Ilse reported her missing. Center administrators advised patience. Guests sometimes took day trips. The local police station filed a missing tourist entry, yet no all points bulletin followed. Hours stretched into days. Ilse distributed posters in 3 languages, while Andrew pleaded through Irish and Latvian media for diplomatic pressure. Search parties of fishermen and backwater boatmen combed canals, but official coordination lagged, hampered by jurisdictional quarrels and the assumption that Liga, a foreign adult, might have chosen to disappear. 38 days later, on April 21st, 2 fishermen entered a mangrove thicket near Kovalam's backwaters. Amid the roots, they found a body suspended upside down from a casuarina branch, head severed and missing, clothing in disarray. Forensic teams confirmed rape, strangulation, and post-mortem decapitation. Dental records and DNA matched Liga Skromane. Public shock ignited overnight. International headlines now forced upon the same institutions that had moved so slowly. Kerala police traced drug-peddling brothers-in-law Umesh and Udayakumar, who admitted luring Liga with promises of marijuana, assaulting her in the swamp, then attempting to erase evidence. They were charged on May 3rd. In those 6 weeks between hope and horror, every hour carried two simultaneous realities: a sister pacing hospital corridors with flyers, and a victim in an unmarked grave of branches and tidal mud. The contrast indicts more than two predators. It exposes bureaucratic sluggishness, indifference to a foreign woman's urgency, and the lethal cost of assuming that a missing adult will simply return. When the court documents are set aside and the headlines fade, we are left with a sobering pattern that extends well beyond the mangroves of Kovalam. Local police stations in many tourist corridors treat missing person reports from foreign nationals as paperwork problems rather than emergencies. Officers who will mobilize instantly for a traffic fatality often defer a disappearance to the next shift because jurisdiction is unclear, budgets are thin, or the complainant cannot speak the local language. In Liga's case, the station logged her absence, filed it under the catch-all code for missing tourist, and waited. That hesitation gifted her attackers every hour they needed. Professor Radhika Bakshi, a criminologist at Delhi's National Law University, points out that the first 24 hours after a disappearance determine the evidentiary trail. Once those hours are lost, the odds of recovery plummet. She calls the delay a structural form of negligence baked into procedure. Bureaucratic inertia is compounded by a cultural ambivalence toward solo female travelers. Kerala markets itself as God's own country, a wellness haven, yet internal police memos reviewed during the trial betrayed an assumption that a woman seeking cannabis might share culpability for whatever followed. Human rights lawyer Sunitha Krishnan argues that this reflexive moral judgment can blunt investigative urgency. If the victim is imagined as reckless, the system feels less pressure to protect her dignity in death. The result is a hierarchy of empathy that leaves foreigners, women, and the mentally vulnerable at the bottom. As details of Liga's murder emerged, European consulates issued fresh advisories urging travelers to register itineraries and avoid isolated stretches of beach. Wellness resorts in Sri Lanka and Bali rushed to update security protocols, aware that a single high-profile crime can crater bookings across an entire region. Travel risk analyst Marcus Fielding notes that global wellness tourism now tops $600 billion a year, yet destination policing has not scaled with that growth. He likens the gap to building luxury hotels without installing fire escapes. People assume safety is inherent in the brand, but safety still depends on local infrastructure that may be underfunded and culturally misaligned with the guests' expectations. Policy recommendations coalesce around 3 immediate fixes. First, mandatory rapid response units for tourist disappearances modeled on Portugal's Polícia Judiciária task force that recovered Madeleine McCann. Second, bilateral victim liaison protocols so that families abroad bypass language barriers and receive real-time updates instead of rumor. Third, gender sensitivity training for police, emphasizing that a traveler's mental health struggles or recreational choices never mitigate the state's duty of protection. Kerala's government has since announced an interagency task force for tourist safety, but advocates warn that without legislative teeth, such initiatives fade when media attention wanes. Liga's tragedy therefore stands at the confluence of booming cross-border wellness travel and outdated local policing paradigms. It reminds us that globalization delivers far more tourists than it does safeguards, and that cultural attitudes toward women's mobility can still dictate investigative seriousness. Unless reform turns these lessons into law and budget line items, the next passport in a morgue locker could bear any nation's seal. Proof that vulnerability, like hope, crosses borders more easily than justice. Liga's family refused to let the mangroves close over the story. Within weeks of her funeral, Ilze Skromane was speaking before Latvian parliamentarians, urging them to press European foreign ministries for standardized rapid response protocols when travelers vanish abroad. She partnered with Irish mental health advocates to create the Liga Skromane Foundation, a small but determined trust that funds emergency liaison officers for families of missing citizens and sponsors, scholarships for psychologists researching safe, culturally competent wellness tourism. Andrew Jordan, channeling grief into advocacy, launched an online platform called Safe Passage that crowdsources safety data from backpackers and retreat guests. Its interactive map marks red flag zones where assaults or disappearances have occurred and offers local hotline numbers. Translated into multiple languages, these efforts share a single premise. Until vulnerable travelers possess reliable information and prompt institutional support, no conviction can feel like justice. The verdict handed down in 2022 delivered sentences of life imprisonment, yet Ilze has said publicly that the word justice still catches in her throat. True reckoning would mean police protocols that trigger without regard to jurisdictional pride, consular officers embedded with the investigative teams from day one, and an international fund to cover repatriation and legal costs so that no grieving family has to choose between debt and dignity. It would mean mandatory licensing for wellness centers that treat mental health conditions with clear security standards and transparent reporting of incidents. Justice, in this fuller sense, is preventive architecture built from hard lessons, not a plaque on a courtroom wall. Liga Skromane sought relief and found tragedy. Her story must not be forgotten, nor should it ever be repeated. If her legacy is to save even one traveler from a similar fate, it will depend on listeners who refuse to consign this case to memory alone. Visit www.bearingwitness.info, explore the evidence, share the safety resources, and add your name to the calls for binding international agreements that protect the vulnerable wherever they seek healing. If the work we do matters to you, if you believe that bearing witness is the first step toward structural change, consider a donation through our Support Our Mission page. Your contribution fuels investigations, funds expert interviews, and keeps these stories in the public square until the systems that failed Liga are rebuilt to protect those who follow in her footsteps. Next time on Bearing Witness, we delve into another heartbreaking case that highlights urgent gaps in our collective response to violence. Join us as we continue our mission, refusing silence and demanding accountability.